It was one of those mornings when the sun already felt heavy by 9, hanging low and mean over the cold D-sec. The air shimmered, the kind of sticky heat that makes you regret ever mowing a lawn or owning property at all. I was standing on my porch, coffee in hand, thinking about repainting the old fence, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a diesel engine growling where it shouldn't be. At first, I thought maybe a delivery truck had taken a wrong turn. Happens sometimes. Google Maps doesn't quite get the rural boundaries right out here. But when I walked down the steps and turned the corner, I froze. A massive semi-truck, white cab, long trailer, was reversing down my gravel driveway like it owned the place. Dust clouds billowed around it. The driver's window rolled down, and a man in a faded cap leaned out, squinting at a clipboard. "Delivery for HOA Storage Division," he shouted over the roar of the engine. I blinked. "I think you've got the wrong address." Buddy looked at his clipboard again, shrugged, and pointed. "Nope, says here, perimeter of Oak Ridge Estates. East, that's my property." I said, stepping closer. "Private property. Not HO land." The driver gave me that look. Half sympathy, half not my problem. "I just drive the trolled me to dump the load here. Foes they?" I asked, but he was already pulling the lever. With a loud hiss, the trailer door swung open, and before I could say another word, a mountain of material began pouring out. Cinder blags of mulch, PVC pipes, and rolls of chain link fencing tumbled down like an avalanche of nonsense. Dust and dirt kicked up, coating my legs, my driveway, and half my lawn. "Ho, stop, what are you doing?" I yelled, waving my arms. "Contract says unload here, lady. Show us storage division," he shouted back. By the time I convinced him to stop, the damage was done. Half the trailer's worth of construction junk now sat smack in the middle of my property. My gravel driveway was buried, my mailbox had disappeared under a pallet of concrete mix, and my poor flower beds were casualties of war. And that's when she arrived. Karen. Everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew Karen. You could hear her before you saw her, the sharp click of her heels, the swish of that clipboard she carried like a royal decree, and the faint cloud of floral perfume that hit you like tear gas. Her blonde bob gleamed in the sun like a helmet of authority. She strutted toward me from the direction of the community park, sunglasses perched on her nose, smile plastered in place. "Oh good. You're here," she said cheerfully, as if she hadn't just turned my property into a construction site. "We needed a temporary spot for the new community garden materials. Oh, lot's full, so we're just using your land for a week or two." I stared at her, jaw slack. "What, using my land?" "Karen, this is my property. Private. It's fenced, deeded, surveyed, and it's got my name on the tax bill every year." Karen tilted her head, pretending to sympathize while completely dismissing me. "Oh, come now. You hardly use this part of the property. It's just sitting here. You're always so quiet. I figured you wouldn't mind." "You figured wrong," I said. "You can't just dump a semi-truck of junk here if it's not junk," she snapped, tapping her clipboard. "It's community improvement materials. We're putting in a new garden by the clubhouse. The HOA storage yard full of mulch and tools, so we had to improvise. You have space, we have need. Win-win." I could feel my pulse in my ears. "Karen, this isn't an HO win. This is trespassing." Her lips tightened into that little smirk she wore when she thought she was being clever. "It's community property, dear. We're all part of the HOA. That means we all share responsibility for the neighborhood." "That's not how proper be dramatic," she said, waving me off. "It's temporary. I'll have the crew come collect it next week." I looked at the pile. Tons of concrete and metal, and then at her perfectly pressed blouse. "Next week. That's 7 days of my land being blocked off." 8, she corrected sweetly. "The landscaping team's schedule is full until Thursday. And since it's for the good of the community, I'm sure you'll be happy to help." I laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "You didn't even ask me. I didn't think you'd mind," she said as if that excused everything. The truck driver, clearly uncomfortable, wiped his hands on his jeans. "So, we good here?" Karen gave him a thumbs up. "Perfect. Thank you." And just like that, he climbed into his cab, rolled up the window, and drove away, leaving me alone with a mountain of supplies I hadn't asked for and a woman who thought she ran the world. Karen turned back to me, adjusted her sunglasses, and smiled that tight HOA president smile. "I'll send you an email later with the project timeline. Oh, and make sure to keep kids and pets away from the pile. Safety first." Then she spun on her heel and marched off, clipboard bouncing against her hip. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the heap of materials sitting squarely on my property. My driveway was blocked, the grass crushed, and a family of ants had already declared squatters' rights. The sun was hotter now, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. For a second I imagined storming after her, demanding she get a crew back immediately. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was the way she dismissed me, or the way the truck driver had shrugged, or just the sheer absurdity of it all. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. If Karen thought my land was free storage, she was in for a surprise. I walked to the gate at the edge of the driveway. My gate, my fence, and ran a hand along the latch. It was old, rusty, but still sturdy. The idea started small, just a flicker of satisfaction at the thought of turning her arrogance back on her. She wanted this stuff here. Fine. It was going to stay here, for as long as I decided. A slow smile crept across my face as I looked back at the pile of concrete and fuzzer baking in the sun. My dog Max trotted up beside me and gave a puzzled whine, sniffing at the mess. "Don't worry, boy," I said, patting his head. "We're not moving a thing." Inside, I grabbed my phone, opened the camera app, and started recording the entire scene. Footage of the dump truck, the pile, the tire tracks, the timestamp. Then I took a few photos of the property line markers, the gate, and even the driver's license plate before he'd left evidence. Just in case. By the time I finished, I was already thinking ahead: locks, chains, documentation, maybe even an invoice for storage fees. I could almost hear Karen's voice in my head demanding access, waving her clipboard like a weapon. I smiled wider. Not this time, Karen. Not on my land. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, I stood there at my gate, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, and made a quiet promise to myself. This pile wasn't moving an inch until I said so. And when it finally did, it'd be on her dime, not mine. By the time the sun dipped behind the tree line that evening, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't even going to send Karen one of those long, passive-aggressive HOA emails she was so fond of. No. This time I was going to let my gate do the talking. After dinner, I drove into town and stopped at the hardware store. The guy behind the counter, Jim, raised an eyebrow when I plunked a thick steel chain and a heavy-duty padlock onto the counter. Starting a junkyard, Joe smiled faintly. Something like that rang me up, and as I walked out, the bag clinking in my hand, I felt that rare kind of satisfaction that only comes when you know you're about to make a point someone will never forget. The night air was cool when I got home. I parked by the fence line and turned on the floodlight that hung over the gate. The pile of HO material still sat there, ugly and smug looking in the yellow glow. Plastic sheeting flapped in the breeze, and one of the PVC pipes rolled lazily down the slope into my flower bed. "Well, that's enough charity for one lifetime," I muttered. I started by inspecting the old latch on my gate, a simple chain hook I'd installed years ago to keep the dog in. It wouldn't do anymore. I pulled the new chain through the metal bars, looped it twice, and threaded the padlock through until it clicked shut. The sound was satisfying, like punctuation at the end of a very long, infuriating sentence. Then I walked back to poured myself a glass of iced tea, and sat down. The night was quiet except for the crickets, the rustle of leaves, and the faint creak of that new chain whenever the wind picked up. It was a beautiful sound. The next morning, I woke to the crunch of tires on gravel and the distant murmur of voices. I didn't rush out. No, I took my time, brewed coffee, fed Max, and let him out into the yard. By the time I stepped outside, the scene at the gate was exactly what I had imagined. Two men in neon vests were standing there, one shaking the gate like it might magically open if he just jiggled it hard enough. Their pickup truck sat idling nearby, trailer attached, clearly here rattled but held firm. "Hey," one of the men called when he saw me walking down the drive. "We're here to pick up the HOA supplies. Gate's locked." "Of sure is," I said, sipping my coffee. "Can you unlock it?" he frowned. I blinked. We were told by Miss Karen that we could access this lot. Karen can tell people whatever she wants," I said evenly. "Doesn't make it true." The two workers exchanged looks. The younger one pulled out his phone. "I'll call her," he said, walking a few paces away. I could hear her voice even from a distance. The sharp, clipped tone that made everyone in the neighborhood tense up. Within minutes, she was there, pulling up in her shiny silver SUV, door slamming hard enough to make the chain rattle again. She marched straight to the gate, sunglasses already in place, heels clicking on the gravel. "What is this?" she demanded. "Why is the gate locked?" "Because," I said calmly, "this is private property, and you dumped 10 tons of material on it without permission." She scoffed. For heaven's sake, we went over this yesterday. It's community property for a temporary project." "You're being ridiculous." "Funny," I said, setting my coffee mug on the fence post. "My deed doesn't mention community property. It says private. Which means nothing comes in or out unless I say so." Karen folded her arms. "You can't just block materials." "Sure I can. You dumped them here. That means they're on my land. And since you didn't ask permission, I get to decide when, or if." Her jaw clenched. "You're joking." I smiled, but I did come prepared. "Here." I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my pocket and handed it through the bars. She took it suspiciously, smoothing it flat. As her eyes scanned the page, her face went from 150 scandalized. Storage fee $150 per day. She read aloud, voice rising. Cleanup fee $2,000. Inconvenience fee $500. What in the world is this? That, I said pleasantly, visit invoice. Since you've turned my property into a storage yard, I figured I might as well treat it like one. This is absurd. She snapped. You can't charge us for this. Sure I can. I even have video evidence of the truck unloading. With your approval. I pointed toward the small security camera mounted above the porch. The police will love that part. Her mouth opened, then closed. For once Karen was speechless. I'll call the authorities, she said, finally grasping for control. They'll make you open that gate. Please do, I said. I'll show them the footage, the deed, and your little authorization slip. Should make for a fun morning. The workers were trying very hard not to laugh. The younger one covered his mouth, pretending to cough. Karen turned on her heel, phone already at her ear, pacing back and forth as she spoke rapidly. 10 minutes later, a sheriff cruiser rolled up, lights flashing lazily in the sunlight. The deputy stepped out, adjusted his hat, and looked between us. What seems to be the problem? He asked. She's illegally holding HO property hostage, Karen said immediately, gesturing wildly toward me. The deputy raised an eyebrow, then turned to me. Van your side. I handed him a copy of the same invoice and showed him the security footage on my phone. The truck, the driver, the pile, and Karen herself standing by with her clipboard, nodding for him to unload. The deputy watched silently, then turned back to her. Ma'am, this is private property. Looks like you gave authorization for a delivery on a land that isn't HOA controlled. That's trespassing. Karen's face went red. But it's for the community. Still trespassing, the deputy said. If she wants to hold your materials until you pay for removal, that's between you two. I'd suggest sorting it out civilly. He tipped his hat to me. You have a good day, ma'am. Then he got back in his cruiser and drove off. Karen stood there speechless again, staring at the locked gate like it had personally betrayed her. The workers shuffled their feet awkwardly, waiting for instruction. Finally, she let out a strangled sound that was half growl, half sigh. Fine, she spat. We'll handle it. And with that, she stormed off, heels stabbing the gravel as she went. The next few days were bliss. Every morning, I'd sip my coffee on the porch and watch the HOA members drive by slowly, glaring at the locked gate and the mountain of supplies they couldn't touch. The sun baked the fertilizer bags until they started to split, and the once neat pile began to look like a landfill. By the end of the week, Karen came back, this time with a new crew and another semi-empty and ready to load. She didn't say a word as she handed me a check. I glanced down at it, the exact total from my invoice. Smart choice, I said, unlocking the padlock and swinging the gate open. The workers here to clean up the mess, loading every last pipe and block back onto the trailer. Karen stood by, arms crossed, watching with barely contained fury. When they were done, she gave me one last icy look. You're quite the neighbor, aren't you? I smiled, leaning casually against the gate. Just following HO rules. Respecting property boundaries and all that. She didn't respond. Just got back in her SUV and drove off without another word. When the last truck disappeared down the road, I closed the gate again, looped the chain through, and clicked the padlock shut one more time. Not because I needed to, but because it felt good. I stood there for a moment, listening to the creak of the metal, the wind rustling through the trees, and the distant sound of the semi fading away. Then I gave the gate a gentle pat. Good job, old friend, I murmured. Next time we lock up before they unload. Max barked once in agreement, tail wagging. I smiled, took another sip of coffee, and turned back toward the house. The faint jingle of the padlock ringing behind me like victory bells.